Hey, YouTube friends. Today I'm really excited because I get to interview Dr. Ward Sanford. He's an author of the Cry for Jerusalem series and also a retired U.S. Geological Survey scientist. So he's gone from being a scientist to an author, and he has written a four-part historical novel that brings to life the dramatic story of Flavius Josephus and the fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD. And I think it's really cool because as a Christian, as a pastor, as a student of the Bible, I'm always trying to get into the minds of the culture and the context of people living in the first century when the Bible was written. And this is a pivotal moment for Christians, for Jewish people, and really for all people, because the Roman Empire had such a huge influence on everything that we do, even today. And of course, if you're a Christian, the New Testament was being written at the same time that all of these events were happening. So after a 35-year career in science, Ward now devotes his time to writing, blogging, counseling, and offering fresh insights into how history and scripture intersect. So I'm excited to have him on the podcast today and let him talk about his amazing book series, Cry for Jerusalem. So let's welcome Dr. Ward Sanford. Should I call you Dr. Sanford or Ward?
You can call me Ward.
Okay. Well, good. It's a pleasure to meet with you today and talk with you about your book series. So I was curious, is it Flavius or Flavius Josephus?
Uh, I pronounce it Flavius Josephus. I think
Josephus. Okay.
yes, I think people are I've heard that pronunciation. That's pretty much the one I hear.
Right.
Um,
So I got the
interesting.
first name right, but the second one.
Yeah, interestingly. So the book is in audio. Um, it's in audiobook form too.
Yeah, I've been listening to it on Audible.
Oh, on audio, right. And
Audible,
as
yeah.
you're aware, then we have I hired a British narrator. And we had a big discussion on how to pronounce Hebrew names and Latin. So yeah, that when you say how do we pronounce Flavius, we had big discussions on how to pronounce the Roman names. Is it
Yes,
Caesar or is it Kaiser,
you're
like the
right.
Romans actually pronounced it? And I'm thinking,
Right.
well, people are too used to Caesar. We're not going to go with Kaiser, even though that might be historically accurate. So
Right. It's always a balance, isn't it? Trying to
it
be
is, yeah.
historically accurate, but also relevant to what people can hear. And of course, who knows? Like language, it just evolves over.
Evolves, right?
I mean, even my children say things differently than I do now. So it's amazing. That's the wonder of human language. Yeah. So that kind of brings up a, a point that how you have to struggle with history and storytelling to balance between being accurate and being relevant, right?
Right. So this is called I call this a historical novel series. It can also be called historical fiction, which is a wide genre of books. And there can be a variety. You can have historical fiction just like, for example, set during the Civil War period, but every character is fictional and it's just a story set in that period. But on the other end of the scale, which this really leans toward the other end of the scale, you have mostly real characters that existed at the time following real events as they happened.
Hmm.
So that's really pretty much the story. Although, you want to make this really dramatic for readers and keep their interest, so you have to add drama and maybe add a couple of characters to really, fill out the story, right?
Yes. Yes, I find as I was listening to, by the way, I've read, well, I listened to the whole first book and just loved it and started the second one. And it's a great story. I also had listened to Josephus's, I guess it was the Jewish Wars.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
this
the
is
one
based on
he wrote
it's
2,000 years
it's
ago.
the one this book is based on
On that.
his writings in that book. Yes.
And I love history.
Yes.
And I've read a lot of history books, and I find them both informative and entertaining. So I thought, well, I'll read because I've heard about him and studied about him.
Hmm.
I'm going to read his actual book. It's a challenge. I mean,
That's what I found.
writers
Yeah.
2,000 years ago didn't write the way a modern reader would think. So what I love about your novel is that it takes that historical information and sort of puts it in a way that is engaging for a modern reader. Because Josephus wasn't thinking about
No, no,
how
not
to
at all.
hold
Yeah.
an attention.
Attention of an audience, right?
Yes, yes.
So yeah, I had a similar experience. So I kept hearing people quote Josephus in terms of what they were trying to say, what Jerusalem looked at the time like.
Mhm.
So finally I decided, well, let me go try to read them myself. And you get up this big book called The Works of Josephus, and wading through that dense history is extremely challenging.
Yes.
But then I found a more modern English translation of the Jewish Wars by Bob Beasley, and I thought, well, this is fairly readable. It's just a better translation that makes it easier to read. So I started reading that, and I was just amazed at all of the detail and the drama, and the fact that Josephus himself was very involved in everything leading up to and including the destruction of Jerusalem. So
Mhm.
he was very much an eyewitness to everything going, and was involved himself as a
Right,
main character.
right.
And I'm like, why hasn't anybody heard these stories? I've been going to hearing Sunday school stories for 60 years, right?
Yeah,
This is never part of it.
no.
So I'm like, well, how could people, how would people have access to these stories? And that's where the idea of this novel series came from. Yeah.
So did you have so when you went to read Josephus to start with, did you think I'm going to write a novel of this, or was it as you were reading it that that came to be?
There, I'm not sure. There was, I think by the time I finished reading it, I just got engrossed in it once I started really into the drama.
Hmm.
And at the end, I was there. There was a point where I thought this could be a novel series, or should be. Maybe somebody's done it, and I look around and like, no, nobody's really done it. Although there is a guy that wrote sort of it, but he was coming at it more from the Roman perspective
Hmm.
about the story. And there's some di dialogue sort of docudramas a little bit on YouTube that are 30 minutes or so that kind of go through some of it, but nothing like what's everything that's in there.
Yeah.
And so I went from this ought to be a good series, and like, well, if it was a series, who would be the characters and what might the plot lines? And they just kept coming into my head, and I'm
Hmm.
to the point where I just felt like I couldn't leave this alone. I have to try to do this, right?
Yeah. Well, I'm really glad you did, and I do think, because I love to listen to books, and I know others that like to read or listen, but I would love to see this made into like a series of some sort, maybe a mini series or something. I think it's got wide appeal because it's the ancient Roman Empire, and so much of what we have today is comes from that. And then there's the whole Judeo-Christian aspect of it, that our faith is shaped and built by all, even the Jewish faith, the rabbinic Jewish faith that we have today came out of the fall of Jerusalem, and we no longer have a temple. How do we practice our faith? And then, of course, for Christians, this is where the New Testament was being written as all this is going on. And
Yes.
Jesus is, you know, in 30, I guess around 30 AD, Jesus is standing there with his disciples, and they're oohing and awing over the buildings, and he's like, "I'll not one stone is going to be left standing on another." So he's foretelling the story that you're telling. So
Well,
it's
I
got
won't
wide
I won't
appeal.
spoil the story for you, but some of those prophecies and more Christian encounters are going to appear in the series. So
Oh,
you're
good.
you're you're only on book two, right? So you
Well, and
are.
that, yeah, and that was one of I will come back to that question.
But
It
I was
is
gonna,
just a Christian book. Is it a
yeah,
Christian series? Because reading the first book, I was fascinated by it, and there's mention of Christians and this and that and the other, which made total, I mean, it just tracked perfectly because Josephus was not a Christian. He was a Jewish person, but he
right,
would have, and all of these Roman people, um, and the Judeans as well, they're not Christians, but they're aware of it.
yep,
There's this little group. So I really like the way you're handling it. But before we get into that, I should have done this already, but there's people out there like, who is this Josephus? Is that some guy up in Appalachia? What is,
Yeah, who is
who
this
is
guy? Yeah.
Josephus? Who is this guy? I mean, we only have an hour to talk, so you don't want to go into full detail. You can read the book, but just what do people need to know?
So, right, people might have heard the name simply because mostly because he's a historian that lived at the time, Jewish Roman historian. He definitely mentions Jesus with some detail in his history. So he's a source outside the Bible at the time, contemporaneous, that mentions, yes, this is Jesus and this is what happened. And so that's kind of where they hear him. And I've also heard recently more like 100 years or so ago, people relied on him more for the history of the time. In fact, I remember people talking about, well, there's the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the Essenes. I'm like, how do you know this? Because the New Testament really doesn't go into detail, but Josephus does. He
Right.
explains who these sects are. So a lot of the context for the New Testament comes out of him. He's the main history recorder, I would say, of Jewish history between the end of the Old Testament and the beginning of the New Testament, and then up through the fall of Jerusalem and Masada.
Hmm.
So he more than anyone else has recorded all of the history in detail that was occurring at the time. So he is the main source of history.
Hmm.
But he's a very controversial figure if you knew what happened, because he well, he's a upper class Jewish person living in Jerusalem, very well educated, fluent in Greek and Latin, Hebrew, Aramaic, and so well educated. Um, he had been sent to Rome at one point, so he was familiar with the Rome and the Romans, and so when the wars started, he eventually got put in charge of defending Galilee. So he was the general up there when Vespasian came in with the legions and ended up being captured by the Romans. And then so he was uh, sort of in captivity with the Romans during the period then leading up to 70 AD. And then uh, his um, his experience and knowledge was valued by the Romans. So they didn't kill him as the enemy.
Hmm.
They said, this guy's educated, let's keep him around. And Josephus started seeing himself as sort of a self-appointed liaison to the Romans. And he wanted to save Jerusalem and the temple, but he saw that their situation was hopeless. So his goal was to get them to surrender. But that didn't look very good to the Jewish and the rebel leaders. It's like, this guy's on the other side working for the Romans, right?
Hmm.
So when the Jews lose the war and he's on the other side, he looks like a traitor, really. And
Yeah.
so for centuries, the Jews, and many still do, consider him as one of the biggest traitor to the Jews.
Hmm.
And in
Like the
fact,
Benedict Arnold
right, yeah,
of
the
America.
Benedict Arnold, right? And
Yeah.
in fact, he went and he he probably had, and he did probably have threats to his life, So he went for security. He went and actually lived in an apartment with the emperors,
Hmm.
who
Wow.
he virtually had become friends with, right? And under that situation, he could sit for years and write all of his writings about the histories and of the war and everything.
And what a gift it's been to us.
And what a historical gift that is to the world,
Yeah.
that has been. So yeah,
Yeah, absolutely. Because he brings a really unique perspective to it, being in the Jewish world and the Roman world. And being in the Jewish world, and what a lot of people don't realize is that at this time period, the distinction between Christian and Jewish wasn't so hard lined as it is now. I
right.
mean, it was kind of
During the time of the
fluid.
story, right, the Christians were considered this sect that came out of Judaism, or originally even part of Judaism, right? So
Right. It oftentimes depended who you asked. If you asked
yeah.
a Christian, they would say, I'm a Jewish person. I believe in Christ was the Messiah."
Now,
Yeah.
Josephus also has a lot of critics even today. They'll say he was very biased in his writings. He was either they'll either say he was biased Roman or he was biased Jewish, and usually that depends on what he wrote that they don't like, right?
Yeah.
They'll say, I don't know if that's true. Well, Josephus was probably biased. Or he even exaggerated. They'll say, for example, when he says that 1 million people died in Jerusalem in 70 AD, they'll just throw up their hands and say, there's no way 1 million people lived in Jerusalem at the time.
Mm,
Well, but if you realize the context of the situation, what happened, two things had happened. First of all, the Romans had gone throughout Judea, destroying all the towns and any rebels that were out in the countryside. So everybody had fled to Jerusalem.
mm,
So it was packed full of refugees coming in for safety.
mm.
And then it was Passover, and everybody goes to Jerusalem in Passover, and that's when the Romans showed up.
Yeah.
So it was really a point where the city was just packed full of people when the siege started.
Yeah. Yeah. That's an interesting point about the how many people were in Jerusalem. Even in Jesus' time, you have to always realize Jerusalem is in flux. It's a pilgrimage site.
Yes.
So you could go from very small to very large really quick.
Yeah, it could go from 10, I'd say maybe 10,000 person permanent inhabitants to, you know, a few 100,000 coming in at Passover times
Yeah,
from
yeah.
all around. Yeah.
Yeah, which is what led into a lot of the, I guess, concerns that the Sanhedrin and about Jesus being there in the middle
Yeah.
of and the Romans too, because it was kind of like their cash cow. That time of year was when they made their money.
Right. But there were huge crowds they had to deal with too. So,
Yes,
yeah.
exactly. So that kind of segues into the idea that I wanted to come back to. Is this a Christian book? As I was reading through it, I mean, for me, it is a Christian book just because, like all history of the first century Roman Empire, in some way is Christian to me because I'm looking at that material, trying to get into the context of the scripture and understand Jesus and his disciples and the early Christians. But if I guess when you go to it, you think, I know it's a Christian book, it's going to be about Christians. In the first book, I'm just hearing like a couple of mentions here and there and yonder. So what are your thoughts on that?
So I wanted to write this for an audience that was broader than just Christians, right?
Yeah,
So if you make this quote a Christian novel that's kind of selling Christianity along the way, then non-Christians and Jews aren't going to be interested in reading it at all.
right,
Rather, I wanted this to be a historical novel that did not ignore religion and everything that was going on at the time. So there's Christians, mentions of Christians, and encounters with Christians, famous Christians at the time. So yeah, there's a Christian undertone a little bit to it, but it's probably an overreach calling it a Christian novel, right?
right,
It's a
right,
historical novel
right,
that does not ignore Christianity.
right. And I will just say I love the way you do it because sometimes I find that a Christian book or a Christian movie, it almost hammers in on things too much.
Yeah.
And like you said, one, it kind of pigeonholes something into a certain genre that it's not going to appeal to someone else. This one has very broad appeal. I could see this in a movie theater that everybody is going to see and everybody's
Hmm.
interested in. But at the same time, I find as a Christian reading it, I find myself seeing the struggles of Josephus and his family, and they're going back and forth between the Romans are a great culture. On the one hand, they've done great things. They've improved our society to some degree, but at the other hand, they limit our religion, and so I see all of these struggles, and I see the struggles about whether you can work with other cultures or whether you have to just follow the law, follow what the Old Testament law says, and be very strict about it. And as a Christian, I find myself reading it thinking, well, this is what Jesus came to. A lot of what he came to address is there another way? Is there, does it have to be just the powerful wielding power over the oppressed? Does it have to be the oppressed trying to find a way to fight back and rebel and change the power dynamics and become the
Yeah.
powerful. And then of course Christ comes into all of this and he's like, it's not about power. It's not about the kingdoms come and kingdoms go, temples rise, temples fall, but my kingdom is forever. And so I see all of that in this. And I want to be I'm rooting for Josephus saying, "Well, you're close, buddy. You're really close."
Yeah.
Jesus was talking about these things, and maybe you could catch. Of course, he's a historical figure, so in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, I don't think Josephus ever
Hmm.
came to Christ, but he was really close.
Hmm. Right.
That's kind of the way I interpret it. Were you thinking about those kinds of things as you were
Yeah, so
crafting the story?
one of the points you brought up was I didn't want this novel series to be from like the Jewish point of view or the Christian point of view or the Roman point of view.
Hmm.
So you're aware that that there are main characters. I would say five main characters. Some are Jewish, some are Roman, and of different statuses in society. You know,
Right.
so it brings all of these people together. In fact, these people are actually become friends, right? It's kind of like an odd uh set group of people that end up, you know, becoming friends, but you get to see everything playing out from different people's perspective, you know, and
Right.
we bring a couple of women, strong women characters into it, so you get to see it both from the side of the men and the women
Hmm.
in society at the same time. So
Hmm. Yeah, that's a really interesting dynamic too to see how women wield power, or maybe wield power is not the right way to express it, but they try to influence things
hmm.
from behind the scenes in their own way based on the traditional expected roles that they would have at that time. So it's really neat to see things being played out from all those different perspectives. One
And
of
so
the
it's yeah, so most of those main characters actually, and most of the characters in the book are real people from
yeah,
history, although like you've discovered we've given Josephus a younger sister.
yes,
So because we wanted to explore a group that was around at the time called the Sakari, who were Jewish assassins. It's like that we have to build this into the story somehow.
yes,
So yeah, so even you know, Josephus's writings, he'll mention a couple of characters,
yeah,
and when I was reading, it's like, oh, we've got to take that person and expand him into a full character, right, and
yeah,
give him a whole storyline. So,
yeah. Yeah, and that was one of the things as I was reading through it, because it is so well crafted, it's hard to tell. And I find myself asking the question often, is this history or is this narrative that you've added into it?
hmm.
Because I'm a student of the Bible and I'm not an expert, but I know the Bible well. If I see a story, like say, for instance, the big one that's out now is The Chosen, and they're sort of doing something similar, but I know the Bible, so I can watch that story and I can say, yeah, that's scriptural, and that's something I don't think that's in there.
Yeah,
But
right.
with your novel, I'm not as familiar with Josephus's life, so I'm always asking the question: is this history or is this added in? Even the characters, I actually cheated, and I took your PDF file of your book and I
Right.
fed it into Chat GPT. I was like, tell me which characters are historical and which ones are not. It made a
Oh,
little
I've never did
column.
that. So how does Chat GPT do with that? Does it find a
Well, let's see. I got it to make a little.
well, so I like one of them is a little bit mentioned and he's not there. It's not going to find him because I had to give him a name, right? So like Saeed, right, is not
Yes,
he's not
Saeed
going to
is
find Saeed, but he's built off something that happens during the you know, during the timeline that Josephus is describing. He describes this person
right.
and you won't maybe figure out that until much later in the series. But mo yeah,
Yeah, so Cleopatra,
right,
and of course I knew the name from, the ancient Egyptian,
right.
and of course that's not who that is, but made sense that that name would be floating around in
Used,
that
right, yeah,
world.
right.
And then Nicanor, the Roman centurion, I kind of thought, well, is he real or not? ChatGPT says no.
It says
Rachel
no. Tabitha is not reading Josephus. He won't find you won't find Nicanor if you put him into into a Google search.
into a Google
But
search.
if you
He's deep in there somewhere.
yeah, if you read the Jewish Wars of Josephus, he has a Roman soldier friend named Nicanor.
Okay, so
It gets
he is
mentioned two
legit.
or three times. So right, he's
Yeah.
not mentioned a lot, but he was a real person. We of course we
And he was
expand him a
a
hundredfold.
friend of some of Josephus.
Some Roman soldier who was a friend of Josephus was named Nicanor.
Okay, okay.
So that's where
Yeah.
it came with the name. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's cool. That's really interesting. So then there was like Jonathan, Rachel,
Yeah, those are all
Zachariah.
Jewish names we came up with, right?
Yeah, yeah. But
But the main Roman figures, Cassius Florus, who's the antagonist of the whole story,
right.
and there's a Syrian governor, Cestius Gallus, was that his name? He was real.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or of
Yeah.
course, all the emperors, all of that's right out of history. The
Yeah.
emperors that go through the series, the
Yeah.
generals, and yeah,
So the majority, it sounds like, of the characters are actually historical figures,
yes,
but then you've added in some to kind of make the
to
story,
fill out the whole plots.
yeah, to
Right,
make
right.
it live. But yeah, that's one of the challenges with a historical novel, right? Or a movie or whatever. It's like how much of it is history and how much of it is
And
added.
that's what captivated me, about historical fiction. I first got introduced through Ken Follett's novels. He wrote one about the World War I and World War II, and I'd be reading through it. I'm like, wait, did that really happen? Then you have to kind of
Yeah,
go to Google and type it in and try to
yeah,
figure out if that's what really happened.
yeah.
It's a great way to learn history, right?
It really
Skips.
is because it makes you actually, if you take the initiative, if you take, do you really want to learn this? And then you go do your own research, so to speak, try to find out something. You can really find out a lot of cool stuff. So yeah, that's cool though. I think it's a great way to learn history and make it because when I was in high school, I hated history. And when I was in college, I hated history. And then I got done with all of that and I just started learning history for fun and or just for information. And all of a sudden I fell in love with it. I think you have to look at history not just as like dates and
Yeah, dates and
names and
battles and
places, but
yeah.
like how did this influence the world and how did it shape who I am today? I think
And
that's
what
so
was it like for
fascinating.
people that had to live through it, right?
Yes, because these are real people. And
Yeah.
that's what I'm always trying as a pastor. Um, I'm always trying to help people see the scripture, the stories there. These are real people, just like you, not somebody in a stained glass window.
Yeah.
They were living, I had a sister who was struggling with the Romans and hating them because she'd been assaulted by them. So
And I think that's what people like about the Chosen series. It makes the disciples much more real and what kind of things did they struggle with.
yes, yes, absolutely. And speaking of dates, and we've been talking about names, I found it really helpful too, and I like how you start each, at least in the first book, and I think you're doing it in the second book so far too. Like each chapter starts out with a date, like
Yeah,
November.
right. It's definitely a timeline, right? It works
Yes.
through it makes you, I like it gives you the feel like you're actually working through history, right? So,
Yeah. Well, it's sort of for me, it gives me something to sort of hang like a to organize my thoughts on something. Hang this. Okay, we're talking about November, and we're in 66, AD.
mhm.
And of course, I always know that. I mean, I know that Jerusalem fell. When I think of it, I'm like 70 AD. I can
Yeah,
remember that.
that's
I
the
can
date
remember
people
that.
know. Yeah,
But it was like a whole process. So it went over
right,
a number of years, and I never have gotten down into the details enough to know. And so with this series, we're kind of working through it that way and
right, right.
kind of understanding how it developed. It didn't just happen. It
Yeah,
had,
it did just suddenly the Romans got tired of them and showed up in 70 AD. There was a lot, starting really with what you discovered was the Great Fire in Rome in 66,
yeah,
led Nero to realize he needed to raise more taxes. So he sends a ruthless tax collector to be the procurator of Jerusalem. who becomes
Yes.
the antagonist of the series, right? So
Yeah. Yeah.
it's
And that's an interesting part of the book too, in a lot of ways. Number one, it brought to life to me the idea, I've heard Rome, Rome burned and Nero played the fiddle while
right,
it was
right, yeah.
burning. But I'd never really thought about what it was like for a massive city to have wildfire sweep through it and how people you would see that being destroyed. And then the recovery part of it, I saw that in the second book. I really liked how I can't even remember the exact scene, but it was like they noticed that that the upper classes neighborhoods were being rebuilt while the poor were
Yeah.
still living in their burned out shells. And I'm in the city now looking around and seeing this. So to be able to see that, like, oh, this was a city. It wasn't just words on a paper, the city burned. It was like, oh, I'm living that now, seeing that and how that affects people. So that was really cool. A really cool part of I like that. I really like that about this book. Just things like that. Another thing I saw was I think it was also in the second book that I think it was Nicanor maybe, or I can't remember who the character was, but anyway, they're in, maybe it was Josephus. He's up in Galilee and he's seeing how the Romans have been temporarily kicked out, and
Yes.
but everything, the neighborhood's sort of gone down because of that. That's the way I read it. It's like he noticed that it seemed like things weren't as well maintained as they had been before
Yeah, well, that's
because the
probably
Romans
true.
were really good at that.
Yeah, they came in and helped build some of the roads and did keep some order.
And so when you kick them out, even if it's temporarily, it's like, oh, the workforce isn't there organized
Yeah.
and getting things maintained. And so just little subtle things like that I
Mm,
really appreciated in reading this. But the also the details of the Galileans, like that's one, you think Israel, but you don't realize, well, Jerusalem's got their own little power
base,
dynamic.
right.
Galilee's got
And
their,
even like we catch on in Jesus' time that the Galileans were thought lesser of in Jerusalem.
yeah,
They're like a they're not considered, the same class in society. So that's still going on,
yeah,
in the late 60s. The Galileans feel like the Jerusalems are snobs and yeah, that's interesting because there are two rebels that end up in Jerusalem trying to take control of Jerusalem, and one's a Galilean. He's got all his Galilean followers, so there's that,
hmm,
tension going on, which really contributes to part of the disaster that ends up happening. I won't spoil it for you, but
yeah, yeah. Oh, I see it there, and it really does inform. Okay, so just as an example, this past Sunday, I'm preaching I'm preaching about Jesus' call, come follow me and I'll make you fishers of men. And so I was thinking of this past Sunday was follow me. And so I'm thinking about rabbis and they're calling people to follow them. And Jesus was one that called people to follow him. And so I was wondering, okay, so did they all travel around? Were they all itinerant? And I'd never really thought about that before.
right, right.
So I started looking. I was like, well, no, most rabbis didn't or an itinerant. So there were some, but mostly Jesus was unique
Being
in
itinerant like
being
that, yeah.
itinerant like that. And I
Yes.
thought about this, and I had just read, um, I was just read your book, and I was thinking, well, Jesus being itinerant was one of the things about that was he's like, I'm not based in Jerusalem, I'm not based in Galilee,
Right.
and there's people that most rabbis would have a school in a certain place,
Yes.
and they would come and Jesus is moving around. It's like I'm for all people. I'm for the
Yeah.
Galileans, for the Judeans. I'm even for the Samaritans because I'm going
Right.
through there
Right.
all the time.
Yeah.
So I never thought about that, but this book just sort of planted a seed there to make me ask that question and then to preach that to my congregation. So it's little things like that I think that's really helpful. I don't know, um, how are you hoping that this book series kind of helps people or what do you want to accomplish with it?
Right. So one of the things I think about a lot now is critics trying to dismiss the historical aspects of Jesus and the early church, right? Trying
Right,
to suggest that this all really developed 100 years later and the stories are kind of made up. So one of my goals is to underpin the whole history of, the church at this time
right,
and, what's the historical context for it to,
right, right. Because it very much is grounded in history.
because the New Testament ends, pretty much at about that time. So this is kind of like, well, what was the time like from the end of the New Testament writing in the mid 60s up until the destruction of Jerusalem? That was only 5 years later, right? And so,
Right,
right, a lot happened in there, and just understanding and underpinning the history of Jesus and how the church was developing, I think is important.
right. So this book series, I'm only on book two. I'm a few chapters into it. How far does it go? Does it go to 70
Yeah,
AD?
all the way through the destruction of Jerusalem. I mean, right. So book four, the final book, is subtitle is Final Siege. So that really takes you all the way through the final siege and destruction of Jerusalem.
Now help my history out. Um, did Jerusalem fall and then Masada, or was it?
Yeah, Masada came after that. So there were still some holdouts in Masada in that fortress down by the Dead Sea. That didn't fall till 72 or 3, I think,
Oh,
a
so there.
few years later.
So I don't want to. I don't know if it's a spoiler alert or whatever, but so at the end of this series, Masada would still be standing.
Yes, we didn't talk about Masada. We just went through
That's a
some stuff.
fascinating historical thing too.
Yeah, there was a little movie made about Masada back in the 70s or 80s with Peter O'Toole, the whole Roman siege of Masada.
Because Masada was sort of lost, wasn't it, until relatively recently.
It was out in the desert. I think the ruins have always been there. But until at 48, when people really started getting back into Israel, it sort of got explored more,
So
and
so they knew it was there. They
dug
just
more,
weren't studying it.
more excavated and visited and all of that, right?
Yeah, yeah. That's
Yeah,
just
what's really interesting is because it's such an arid desert climate, and I've been to the top of Masada there, and you can look out on the one side and still see the scars of the Roman encampment there from 2,000 years ago.
yeah, yeah.
Pretty
And that's
amazing.
another thing that I thought I've been to Masada too, and I've been up on it, and you think, how could anybody get into this
Yeah,
fortress?
this is talk about a fortress, right? With
Yes,
vertical cliffs everywhere.
but then I'm seeing Jesus talking to his disciples about having faith, and he's saying, they're like, give us more faith. And he's like, if you just had the faith of the size of a mustard seed, you could move mountains.
Mountains, right?
And I'm thinking, he's seeing these Romans and the amazing things that they can do. They believe in themselves, they
Yeah,
believe in their ability, and they will move a mountain,
they
which is
will,
basically what they did to get
yeah,
into
create their
Masada.
own mountain to get in
Yeah,
there. Yeah,
yeah. And so, and Jesus is always talking about, well, there are certain times in the Gospels where he's like amazed by the faith of the Roman centurion, and so he sees the good that's there, um, that they're capable of, but they're just missing, they're
yeah,
missing something. So that's something that's just been on my heart lately as a Christian, leading my congregation, Jesus coming in, and of course the Jewish people were wanting a Messiah that would get rid of the Romans
yes.
and give them independence, and he comes in.
That fervor didn't end, of
Oh
course,
no,
right? Yeah,
no, it didn't end.
it
And he cried. The title. I don't know where you got the if I don't know where you got the title from. So that would be a question. Here's my theory. Here's what I heard when I read it. It was Jesus crying for Jerusalem in Luke when he's coming up from the Mount of Olives and he starts crying because he's like, they're not going to get it. I wish
yeah.
you would have got it. but you're not going to get it. And he's foreseeing the future. Did I get that right? Or
Yeah, pretty much. I did. Interesting, when I was trying to come up with a title about Jerusalem or something, it occurred to me I didn't want to take a calamity, almost genocide, and
Hmm.
like try to look like I'm making a profit from it.
Hmm.
So let's memorialize it in the title. So Crying for Jerusalem is the loss of Jerusalem,
Right,
right? And so that's kind of where I ended up at. Yeah.
right. Um, but yeah, absolutely.
And certainly reflects Jesus's crying for Jerusalem. It
Yeah,
encapsulates that as
yeah,
well, right?
yeah. Well, and the thing that's so much been on my mind is how um Jesus is he's looking beyond the physical. He's looking beyond like the Jewish small vision of Jerusalem and the Roman, even the Roman small vision of Rome and the peace of Rome. And he's looking beyond that. He's saying, there's parts of that you're seeing, but there's a grander, the kingdom of God is grander than all these
Yes,
human concepts.
right, right.
And you start going in the right direction, and then you stop at we're the Romans and we're the best and everybody should be like us, or we're the Judeans
Yeah,
and everybody should be like us. And Jesus, like the kingdom of God is beyond that. It's beyond that. And Jerusalem, even in Revelation, and the city of God comes out of heaven, but it's like Jerusalem is a foreshadowing of that ultimate kingdom. And maybe Rome, in some sense, is a foreshadowing of it too. Um,
yeah. I think history is amazing. It seems like God was working in the nations around Judea at the time of Jesus, just to make everything ripe for his coming and spreading of the message, right? So,
yes, yes,
yeah, even Rome building roads uh, throughout the entire region so that the gospel could spread faster, right?
yes. It's and the transition from using scrolls to using I guess it wasn't quite books yet, but it was what do they call them?
Yeah, that's
Folios
amazing.
or
I learned I learned something like this about how they were writing at the time. You know, they had these wooden little frames that had a wax layer on them,
yes,
and they could inscribe things into the soft wax, their writing into the soft wax. And then they could take that to somebody who would and you can erase really easy. You make a mistake, you just wipe over the wax and redo it. And we'll finally have something that you like, and then you take it to a scribe, and they'll use ink on papyrus, right, and make it more permanent.
make it more permanent, right?
But then once you were done, you could just erase the whole thing because wax is soft and start over. It's like, wow, that's pretty ingenious. I never knew they did that, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, it's like all of the technology was coming together at just the
Hmm.
right time so that the good news of Christ could spread
Hmm.
all over the world. So if this series ends at 70, are you looking at anything? This is a four-part series. Are you done? Are you looking ahead or
Well, I always wondered at the beginning why this hadn't been done before, right?
yeah,
And then once I got into it, I realized, well, there either had to be two things. You either had to be a really good novelist yourself wanting to do this story, or like me, of course, you mentioned at the beginning, I've been a scientist for 35 years.
right,
I've written a lot of scientific journal articles. It's very different style, right? It's just the facts, right?
right.
Right, not dialogue and plots and all of this. So I went to get a professional writer who knew how to do that, which takes an investment on my part. So either you've got to have somebody willing to make a financial investment into this.
Yeah.
So until this pays off, there isn't going to be any more story. And let me tell you, it hasn't paid off yet. But you mentioned something earlier, and that was, yeah, I always envisioned myself, this could be a great, streaming series,
Yes.
with all of the drama and things. So about 3 years ago, I started working with a producer in Hollywood production company. So they've been pitching this, and we now have two Israeli directors who are interested in the work. And my producer is about to start pitching this to some of the big streaming companies to see if we could get something like this funded. So
I really hope you can because I think it would broaden it out to a
but yeah, it
wider
would
audience.
definitely be the marketing coup everybody dreams of, right? So
Yeah, yeah, and of course, the well, books are always better than I find
yes,
books always better than movies or series.
and
Um,
they complement one another. In fact, the movie and streaming
yeah,
industry realizes that. So having a book series already is a boost if you're trying to sell this into that market. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I will say though, I have found there have been a number of different books that have been made into what I found works well is series.
Yes.
You can do like 12 episodes because when you make it into, say, an hour and a half or a 2 or 3 hour, even a 3 hour movie, trying to cram a book into that is just
Yeah. Well,
nearly
you can
impossible.
imagine.
You got to cut so much.
Yeah, right. You can imagine I don't think there's any way you could cram all of this into two or three movies.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
would just you'd
You
just be
lose a
telling the
lot
main,
of the,
you'd lose all the character development, right?
yes, yes. But when you have more episodes, it seems like you can keep more of that and flesh it out a little bit more.
Right, right.
If it's done well, I don't pretend to know how that's all done. I know when I write a sermon, you start out with 10 pages of really cool historical stuff that I think's really cool. I want to tell everybody about Josephus and all of this historical stuff, and they're just like, look, you got 15 minutes, man. Just tell me what this is about and get it done. So I end up having to cut everything just to get it down to a manageable sermon that I can hold someone's attention for 15 or 20 minutes. I don't pretend to know how you do that with a book and a movie, but
Right. No, I've learned a little bit about this just having discussions with my producer. Basically, there's a room full of writers, but then you also have like a one person that's in charge of the entire plot line, right? So there,
mm,
that person is paying attention to the entire book series or the plot line has to be for the entire series
yeah,
and keeping that on track. But then you've got for every episode, you've got half a dozen writers, trying to put all the words into the single episode at a time
yeah, yeah.
and maintain some connection to the book series, but also it being on film and in a book has to be uh, presented in different ways.
Well, I thank you for doing the work to make it happen and going to the expense. I think
But
it's
I was going to tell you, so I am working on a nonfiction book
oh yeah.
right now at this time because all of the research I had to do for this series, I did a lot of research around what the Temple Mount looked like because we've got characters running around there. So what's it going to look like? Because if you've looked into this at all, you've got different people with different ideas. Where was the temple exactly? There's kind of a most popular one
Hmm.
that's been out for a while now that the temple was located, where the Dome of the Rock is.
Right.
But I came across some work by a historian, yeah, sort of his British. Well, he was a Josephus scholar. I mean, he was a lawyer for the government uh, in his career, so he thought very carefully about research. But he studied Josephus for 25 years and was also a Christian author, and was living at the time that the British government had gone in and started really going in and looking at the Temple Mount and was allowed to go in and sort of excavate
Hmm.
and with a guy named Charles Warren, and they really first started coming up with ideas of where the temple was. So this guy Thomas Lewin looked very carefully into all of Josephus's writings, and every time he mentioned the temple, and really was able to piece together very carefully about exactly what the temple sanctuary, outer sanctuary looked like, where it was on the mount and everything.
Hmm.
But that was not the popular view. The rabbis liked a different view, so it got kind of locked away in a library. His publication about it had never seen the light of day until Google comes along and starts going through libraries and scanning old articles and putting them online. This is how he
Hmm.
discovered this
Hmm.
thing. So I'm trying to write this book about rediscovering Herod's Temple Mount, about where Josephus tells us the temple was and what the whole layout looked like.
Uh,
So
so is that book,
no, I'm
you're working on it?
I'm just starting. Yeah, I'm just really starting to get a good uh, handle working on it. Yeah,
Well, well, that'll be interesting. I'll be looking for that as it
yeah.
comes out. I was kind of curious as I've been reading through, and I don't have a hard copy of the book because I'm listening to it on.
Oh, right. So there's maps in the hard copy.
Well, and I do have the PDF
Uh,
that I
oh, right,
got through the interview, so I'll look through that. But I was curious if there was like an appendix or some kind of resource that kind of laid out like which characters were real and which ones weren't, or I mean, or which part of I mean, which part of the book were historical and which ones
right.
were added in.
I've thought about like doing that and even putting it on my website.
Yeah,
But I have not done that yet. Certainly, if this ever got into a streaming series, that's something I would likely do as the episodes came out.
yeah,
Post things about, okay, here were the real things that happened, and these were the real people, and these were not.
right,
Because
right. Speaking of that, and before we go, I know we're getting close to an hour here, but you are a Christian counselor, as I
yes,
understand that, and
that's right. Yeah,
you have a blog and a
I do. I have
website, and
the website cryforjerusalem.com. There's
okay,
a whole blog series, or I've written dozens of blogs about the time period and the history and other related topics. Some apologetic things I've come across in my research that I feel like need to see the light of day. So those kind of things.
yeah. So I'll definitely leave a link for all of those things in the description of the video, and hope people will go and check that out. Um, so you are retired from working
Yes,
for the what is it, the GS
USGS, right?
USGS, and now you're a Christian counselor or a counselor?
I've been part-time counseling for 12 years. I've increased my workload there a little bit too.
Yeah,
So, but continuing to work on the book series and
yeah,
things. So,
yeah. So what made you decide to make that change?
which change?
To the well, we talked about the book, but to counseling.
Well, so I work with a group that's now called Network 220. It's a national group, and they used to be called the Association of Exchange Life Ministries. And I got exposed to their teaching and their messages and things, and it made such a personal difference in my life
I see.
that I decided I wanted to share
You,
this with others, right? And yeah, I always tell people, if you'd asked me 15 or 20 years ago, would I ever be a counselor? I'd say you're out of your mind. It's like I'm this introverted scientist. That sounds really scary, but yeah, the message of grace uh, in my life has been sort of transformative. So yeah,
yeah.
I do some counseling too. So
Well, I find as a pastor, and I'm not a counselor, but I counsel. Um, I I'm an introvert also. Excuse me, but I find one-on-one conversations like this,
right,
great.
very yeah, we find these very meaningful. So right,
Yes.
even counseling when you're one-on-one with somebody, it's meaningful. So
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It matters. It's the small talk, it's the mingling and floating around the room that
yeah, the small talk.
scares me and drives me crazy.
Wife wants me to take me to parties and things. I'm like, oh, do I really have to do this?
Yeah, 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 yeah. Well, thank you for taking the time to share about your book
Well,
today.
thank you. Yeah, thank you, Chris, for
Uh,
having me too. Yeah.
is there anything else that you would like people to know about yourself? We didn't even ask about your family.
Yeah, I live in Northern Virginia. Wife, we have two grown sons who live in the area.
Okay,
And right.
awesome, awesome. Well, thank you again for being here, and I look forward to sharing this with everybody, and I hope people will read your book because all four of them, because they're great, and I've really enjoyed them and found them both entertaining and informative, and also challenging because now I got to figure out where's the difference between where's the line between entertainment and informative. So
Right, right.
that's
Yeah,
work I got to do, which is always good.
it reminds me, I got influenced style wise, I would say, by Dan Brown, because when I read one of Dan Brown's novels, I very appreciated that he had short chapters, right?
Yeah,
You could like put it down whenever you needed to. Of course, if it's a page turner, you like never want to. You're like, oh, I could just read one more chapter. It's only 4 pages, right?
yeah,
So
yeah,
right, so we kept the chapters short, right, for that reason. So
yeah. Well, it's flown very well, and I look forward to. I've already started telling people like from my church, like you need because I know who likes to read.
yeah, that's right.
It's a good book. You
Not
need to
everybody
read.
likes to read, but there's a lot of historical novel fans
And I
out
really, really, and I will say this too. I really, 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 really appreciate it being in audio form because I just prefer audio. I can
there. Well,
digest it
that
better.
has been a challenge because I know that there's a lot of people out there now, more and more, that prefer the audiobooks. But in terms of marketing, it's harder to focus in on where that group is.
Mm,
It's easier to market. They're available on paperback and Kindle, so there's
yeah,
a lot of Kindle readers out there too.
absolutely, absolutely.
But it just seems like the audiobook sales ought to be a bigger proportion of what they are. So I'm not sure
Trying to
best
find how
trying
to
to
tap
find
into it.
how to get the message out to the listeners. Yeah.
Well, maybe with the podcast, it might help
Yeah.
because I
Maybe
find that crossover. But for me personally, I'm either listening to when I'm in my car or exercising, I'm either listening to a book or a podcast, and then
that's
maybe
true.
music is on the third tier. So
So the podcast listeners will also be audiobook fans, right?
yeah, I think so. I think
Yeah.
yeah. Well, again, thank you so much for meeting with me today, and I'm going
Thank you,
to
Chris. Yeah.
share all your stuff online, and I want people to read your book, and I hope they will. And I wish you all the best,
You too.
family, and in your book. So.